everyone. Liz from the Chillicothe and Ross County Public Library here, and I'm here with Jonna from the OSU Extension Office. And today we're doing another in our series of basic cooking skills and nutrition with Jonna. So Jonna, what are we going to do today?
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about, like you said, we're doing kitchen basics. So we're going to go real basic, talking about reading recipes and ways to avoid pitfalls by just common mistakes we make when we are doing recipes. So I'm just going to talk you through it a little bit. Pretty simple stuff, real easy, and then we're going to make some orange oatmeal pancakes, which I know it's not breakfast time, but it's a really good recipe. It's got a lot of steps, so I kind of wanted to do this one so you can kind of see the measurements and the stirring and that kind of stuff.
Well, pancakes are good any time of day, and next week, next Tuesday at the library, we are doing pancake art, so that should be a lot of fun.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, great. Good timing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So did
Okay.
you want to start with your
Yeah, let's do
slide?
the slides. And yeah, okay, I'm going to talk about, we're almost through June. We're coming into the last week, but June is National Fruit and Vegetable Month, so this is a good time to experiment with new fruits and vegetables in your diet. Go to the grocery and try to pick out one new fruit or vegetable a week and to see if you like them. And maybe try something that you haven't tried for a long time, because as I've talked about before, our palates will change, our taste will change. So try something you haven't tried for a few years and see if you like it. You never know, you might get a new favorite in your diet. And then you can always go to our Ohio Snap Ed website or Celebrate Your Plate website and find a lot of really great recipes. So check those out. That's a good way to find something new to add into the repertoire as well. Okay, Liz, if you want to go ahead and start with the recipes, and we'll talk a little bit about this. Okay, this little slideshow thing here is kind of my interpretation. I talk to myself a lot. So this is following a recipe 101 by someone who makes a lot of mistakes, and that would be me. I tend to get in a hurry and not take my time, and I'll skip a step, or I will forget what I'm doing. It's just crazy what goes on in this head of mine sometimes. So the next one, we'll just talk a little bit about your number one rule of doing a recipe. So that one will pop up. Liz, is it going to work? There we go. So number one rule of a recipe is to read the entire recipe before you start anything. Number two rule is to read it again, because a lot of times, if you're like me, you'll be skimming through and you might miss something really important that first time through. Most cooking disasters start by skipping a step. So just by going through and asking yourself these two questions. So ask yourself, do I have all the ingredients? Do I have all the right utensils? Do I have a big enough skillet? Do I have the right size baking pan? Do I have enough time? Don't come in from, a busy day, 5 o'clock, and decide you're going to make a full-on lasagna. That's just going to be too much of an undertaking, and you're probably not going to have dinner on the table till 8:30 at night. So, make sure you got enough time to do what you're thinking about doing. And then, is it going to be enough or too much to serve my family? Now, being too much is not always a problem, because you can always make a double batch and freeze it and save it for a later date. But is it going to be enough? If you got a recipe that's going to serve 4 people and you've got 4 kids and you and your spouse, you're not going to have enough to feed everybody. And then the one big question a lot of us always have is, what am I going to serve with it? You might come up with this really fantastic casserole, but do you want to have just that casserole, or do you want to have a side dish with it? So kind of plan out ahead of time what you're going to have with it as far as a side dish. That way you're not struggling while everything's, you're finishing up your main dish and like, oh no, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So think that out just a little bit. And then some other things that I always like to kind of go through. These are just words of wisdom from an old cook. So when you start out, try to gather everything you need before you start cooking. And you always notice when I'm cooking, I'll have all my ingredients laying out here on the counter. Now, I'll admit I do some of that just because I'm doing this online with you. But I try to do that as well when I'm cooking for myself. I try to make sure I got everything there. That way, I'll be less inclined to skip something, okay? And then decide if you're going to need to make a substitution. So say maybe you went to the cabinet and it was calling for a certain spice that you don't have. Well, is there anything you can sub in? If there's sense to you don't have to necessarily say, okay, I'm not going to make this, but you might want to look. You can always use your phone, search it, and see, okay, what would substitute basil or what would substitute nutmeg if you don't have that to put into your recipe. Or maybe it's calling for buttermilk. What am I going to do? I don't have buttermilk. Things like that. And then complete the steps of the recipe in the order that they're written. Sometimes we just have to do what we're told, because a lot of times the reason that it's written that way, the author has made this recipe before, and they have realized, if you mix these two ingredients first, it's going to make it blend together better. Then maybe like tonight we're going to make pancakes. So if you wouldn't mix your liquid ingredients together before you put them in with your dry ingredients, you might wind up with clumps. So sometimes just following instructions is the biggest thing we have to do to keep from making mistakes. And then use the correct measuring tools, cups and spoons that you need, especially if you're making something that's going to have like a baking powder or a baking soda, something that's going to have to be an exact amount. Don't eyeball it unless you've made it before. It's not quite as crucial. You guys have heard me say before, if you're making a casserole or a soup, you can eyeball it a little bit. You see me do that quite a bit. But if you see me doing something that I'm baking, or I'm going to make like something that's going to have to rise, or it's going to have a certain consistency, I am pretty diligent about making sure I'm using the correct measuring utensils. And then keep a calculator close by. I keep one in my my kitchen drawer, because it's always, or if you got your phone handy too, that works as well. But if you're doubling or having a recipe, don't always depend on, okay, you think you're doing it right, especially when you get into doing like quarter cups and that kind of stuff. It can be a little bit of a daunting task. I mean, math lets me down a lot. So, keep that calculator there so you can make sure you're getting exact measurements, so you don't make a mistake and put too much or too little of something in. And then just a couple things to make it a little easier on yourself is put things away as you finish up with them. I don't do that so much when I'm cooking with you guys, but when I'm cooking for myself, I am constantly, I'm putting the bottle of oil away, or I'm setting the flour back in the pantry, just to get my countertops cleaned off and keep my workspace as clear as possible. That's going to make things go a lot easier, and it's not such a daunting task at the end where you have all this stuff to put away. And then also keep a sink filled with hot soapy water. You can throw your dishes in there as you're done with them. And it also makes a quick way to wash your hands and keep your hands clean while you're cooking, to have that hot soapy water on hand real quick without having to, mess up your faucet and that kind of stuff. So these are just some really basic things that probably most of you do, but just in case, there you go. I've kind of reiterated, this is going to make things a little bit easier on us. All right, so our recipe tonight is a orange oatmeal pancake. And like I said, I picked this recipe because it's got some steps to it, and it's kind of something you have to follow along. Now, I didn't get a chance to print my recipe off, so I've got things written down here. But our ingredients are going to be some plain all-purpose flour, some whole wheat flour, some quick oats, some baking powder, some canola oil, some orange juice, some milk and egg, and some cooking spray. So it's got, quite a few ingredients. So to start off with, I've already washed my hands. I'm going to start off by measuring out my dry ingredients. And it calls for a half a cup of each. It calls for a half a cup of all-purpose flour, a half a cup of whole wheat flour, and a half a cup of quick oats. So I'm going to start off with my all-purpose flour. And when you're measuring dry ingredients, you want to try to always put them in with a separate, I have a scoop here in my flour container. Pour them into your measuring cup instead of dipping that, because that way you're not going to have the chance of packing it in there too tight and having more ingredients than you need. And then just take a flat utensil, butter knife works great, and just scrape it across the top, and there you've got a level cup. Okay, so there's my all-purpose flour. Let me keep my scoop out here because I'm going to use it in my whole wheat flour. And I'm going to do the same thing with a half a cup of whole wheat, I can't talk again tonight, a cup of whole wheat flour, and just going to scoop it in here. And take my knife and just level it off. That way I've got a nice level, even cup. Put that in my bowl. And slide this back out of the way. And then this is just good old quick oats, okay? I wouldn't recommend using whole oats in this because they do tend to get a little tougher, say a little tougher, and you want these a little softer in your pancakes. And you notice since this doesn't pack like flour does, I just dip that in, okay? So there, I've got my half a cup of each one of those. And then the same goes true with your baking powder. So we want 1 tablespoon of baking powder. And what did I do with my tablespoon? There it is. So here's my tablespoon, and you can see how it has a special container lid on your baking powder container. That way you can just dip it in, stretch it across, and you have a level spoonful. Okay, so that's going into my bowl. And then it also calls for a 1/4 teaspoon of just plain salt. Okay, so I have a 1/4 tablespoon, level it off. If you are watching your sodium intake, you could actually leave that out. You don't necessarily have to put that in. And then I'm just going to take my spatula. I'm going to mix my dry ingredients together to get all my flours blended together, to get my oatmeal blended in. Make sure that baking powder goes through my dry ingredients so that everything will rise up on the griddle the way I want it to. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to set those to the side. And then we're going to start mixing up our wet ingredients. So we're going to start off with, I have just 1 large egg. Crack it on the counter. Don't crack it on the side of your bowl because then you might get pieces of shell in your bowl. And I got on my hands. So let me rinse that off real fast with some soap. Okay. And then I'm going to take a fork and then just lightly beat this to get it stirred around. And then I've already measured out my half a cup of just milk. The recipe I think calls for low-fat milk. I have done this before I use a lot of plant-based milks, you guys know that, but it doesn't seem like the plant-based milks interact with the baking powder quite as well, so your pancakes may not be quite as thick, so I'm using regular milk for this. And then it calls for 3/4 cup of orange juice, so you can see my measuring cup here, and I'm going to measure out 3/4 cup of orange juice, and you can see the line there, 3/4 cup. And you always want to if you're not really, eyeball it to make sure. So I have just a little bit more than I should in there, so I'm not going to dump all this in the bowl. Okay, so there's that. And then 2 tablespoons of canola oil. You can use vegetable oil if that's what you have on hand, but I do happen to have some canola oil for a change. A lot of times I don't. So there's 1. And you want to get these as even as possible to the top, so you make sure you're getting a nice level spoonful. Okay, so there's that. Put my lid back on my oil and get it over here out of the way. And then I'm going to turn on my griddle, let it start heating up here. So I'm going to mix this all together with my spoon. And you want to make sure you get that egg stirred in really well. Okay, and then you're going to take your dry ingredients and you're going to pour your wet ingredients into your dry ingredients, okay? And I'm following the steps just as it was written in the recipe, guys. I promise. And then I'm just going to take my spatula and I'm going to stir this together until everything is just moistened up. You don't want to over stir it, but you want to make sure you don't have any dry clumps as well, okay? And if it seems like your flour is clumping, you may want to get a whisk, but like I said, you don't want to overbeat it because you want to keep some of that air in there, keep some air bubbles in there. That's what's going to make our pancakes kind of fluffy. And then just keep scraping the sides of my bowl down. And your batter will be a little lumpy. That's just the nature of pancake batter. And the whole wheat flour tends to make it clump a little bit too. Now this is a really good recipe for, you got your orange juice in there, so we got a fruit. You got your whole wheat flour, which is giving you extra fiber in there. And then we're going to use some blueberries as topping, so that's going to be even more fruit into our mixture. Okay, so you guys are going to fly across the room. Here you go. Get you over here by the stove so you can see what we're doing. And I've got my griddle heating up, and I've just got some cooking spray, and I'm going to just lightly spray my griddle. Turn this around so you can see. And then I've got a 1/4 cup dry measuring cup. Good way to make sure that your pancakes stay consistent sizes is to use a cup like this, and you can just put it on the griddle. I'm going to have to use a whisk on this just a little bit, guys. Hang on just a second. Because as I said, sometimes that whole wheat flour doesn't seem to want to mix up. Act like I'm in somebody else's kitchen. I didn't know where my whisk was. Okay. I don't want to have dry clumps in there. All right, that's better. Sometimes you just have to call an audible when you're doing these things. Okay, let's try this again. All right, so my skillet's good and hot. So just taking a quarter cup of the batter at a time, dumping it on my griddle. And you should be able to get at least 3 pancakes at a time on here. So you're going to cook these until they start browning. It usually takes just a couple minutes for the first side to brown. Then you're going to flip them over, and you'll see how the bubbles start coming up on them. See the bubbles starting to break? They'll cook pretty quick, especially since I've got this turned up pretty high. Now I'm going to use some blueberries as a topping. You can use maple syrup. You can use honey. You can use just a little bit of powdered sugar if you want to get really, get a little bit of sweetness, but not a whole lot of sugar in there. You can do that. With the orange, I wouldn't recommend. I mean, some people might like eggs along with them. I think that might be okay. But these make really nice, fluffy pancakes, and they have the extra little sweetness from the orange juice. So you really don't need a whole lot of the pancake syrup with all the high fructose corn syrup in it. You can just use a little bit of fruit, or you can just eat them the way they are. You don't really even have to put a whole lot of sugar on them. And since this is not I'm not really into breakfast tonight. A lot of times I do have breakfast for dinner, but I'm going to freeze these by putting them in with pieces of wax paper in between them. Not quite ready yet. And then I can throw them in the freezer and take them out as I need them and pop them in the microwave and heat them up, and I'll have pancakes anytime I want during the week. Okay, so there we go. They browned up really super quick. I'm going to impress you guys by not messing one of these up. Watch out. Oh, look at there. I got all 3 of them over without messing them up. Sometimes I amaze myself. So I'm going to let that cook to make sure that the other side gets nice and brown. And you can serve these up with a little bit of maybe some nice lean ham in the morning, or you can use, I guess eggs would be okay with these. I don't know why I was thinking I had a middle block against the eggs, but it's not. And this has got the oats in there, so you're getting your double up. Okay, there's the pancakes. Let me put the blueberries on there. And these are just frozen blueberries that I thawed out, and they make their own juice. If you want to get really fancy, you can get some low-fat whipped cream and put on there as well. And looky there, guys. Look how pretty that is. All right, Liz, that went pretty quick this week.
Yeah, and those don't look delicious.
Yeah, they smell really good too. That orange juice just gives them a really nice, just a little tang to it, and a natural sweetness where you don't have to have all that syrup. This right here is really great.
When you grabbed that half gallon of orange juice, you were talking about milk.
Was I?
And I was thinking, that's not milk, is it?
Well, by not having my recipe, that's what happened. If you don't have a good recipe to follow, it really messes you up. That's how you can make those mistakes I was talking about. So, print off your recipe and have it there handy.
So you talked earlier about substitutions and being ready with your substitutions. Let me go ahead and put up your substitution slide here.
Yes. Nice segue right into that. So, I mean, a lot of times we will find out that we don't have all the ingredients. So there are some things that are really common. So if the recipe is calling for breadcrumbs, you can always use rolled oats or crushed up bran cereal. Anything that's like that, you can just you can add it in. And the whole purpose there is you're actually going to be adding more fiber. And then butter, margarine, shortening, or oil in a baked good. You can substitute applesauce or prune puree. You also can use baby food, believe it or not, if you don't have butter or margarine or something like that. I do this just on purpose anymore. I use applesauce in just about every cake that I bake instead of using the oil. I have used the applesauce in these pancakes before as well. Canned meats, fish, vegetables, and soups. Always look for your lower sodium, lower reduced versions of those. Or you can always use fresh if you've got it on hand. A leftover chicken breast, a leftover piece of fish will add in there. If you have some mixed vegetables maybe from the night before, use that instead of a canned. Cream, you can use fat-free half and half, or you can use evaporated skim milk, which is always a good thing to use as well. Cream cheese, full fat cottage cheese, you can sub those out with the fat-free, low-fat versions of those, or help me out with this, Liz. I always mispronounce this. It's like a lower fat cream cheese.
That's not one that I've ever heard anyone say out loud. But I say Neufchâtel because I think it's a French word, and that's how it's pronounced in French.
Yes, yeah, and I knew you knew that. I know you have the French Canadian there, so you're good with that. Or you can use pureed low-fat cottage cheese as well in the place of cream cheese or full-fat cottage cheese. Eggs can be substituted. Just kind of say it on there funny. You can just use the egg whites, which is going to reduce the saturated fat because most of the saturated fat is going to be in the yolk. Or you can use a quarter cup of egg substitute. You can buy in the little cartons. All-purpose flour. When it calls for a cup of all-purpose flour and you want to get a little more fiber in there, you can sub out half of it for whole wheat flour, just like we did tonight. Ground beef or any kind of ground meat like that can be subbed out with leaner cuts of chicken and turkey, or you can actually use tofu as well. Mayonnaise, you can use reduced fat versions of it, or I very seldom use mayonnaise or sour cream anymore. I use Greek yogurt for just about everything. Meats, you can always sub out half of the meat. If they say you're making a meatloaf, use a half a pound of ground meat instead of the whole pound, and sub out the other half for chopped up vegetables. We'll make that stretch out a little further and getting all the extra veggies in there. Evaporated milk can be used to support, obviously for the lower skim fat. And then whole milk, you can use any type of reduced fat or fat-free milk, or you can use the plant-based milks as well. But as I said, sometimes when you're doing baked goods, the plant-based milks, they just don't rise quite as much in my experience. I have other people who say they have no trouble at all with it. Pastas, try to sub those out with some whole wheat pastas or spaghetti squash, which the gardens are coming on. We'll be having a spaghetti squash in the grocery more and in our own gardens. White rice, use the brown rice or whole bulgur wheat or pearl barley are good substitutes there. Seasoning salts, garlic salts, any of the pre-made packaged seasoning mixes, you probably can go to your pantry and you've already got all the things you need to make your own salt-free, sugar-free, preservative-free versions right there in your pantry. And then sour cream, as I said earlier, I haven't used sour cream forever. I use fat-free Greek yogurt, and I love it. It tastes just the same to me anymore. So, be flexible. Don't think you have to use exactly what the recipe calls for. And as I said, you can always use that phone to look up what substitutes this, and it's always going to give you something you can switch something out for. I had to come up with a thing for buttermilk the other day because I obviously never have buttermilk in my house. And all you need to do, obviously, is I guess just put in a tablespoon of vinegar or a tablespoon of lemon juice into a cup of whole milk or 2% milk, and you got buttermilk.
And that depends on which kind of buttermilk you're trying to substitute, though, because it's called buttermilk.
Is there? Okay, see, I don't know a whole lot about buttermilk. So what would be two different kinds?
So there's what you find on the shelf at the grocery store is usually actually cultured buttermilk, and that would be a substitute for that because it's basically just giving the sourness, although you're not getting the probiotics that are in cultured buttermilk.
Okay.
But the other thing that's called buttermilk is if you're making your own butter, the liquid that's left over,
The whey?
buttermilk.
Yes.
No, not the whey.
Okay.
But once you pull out the milk solids and fats into the butter, then you have a liquid left that's called buttermilk.
Okay,
Also.
that's what my husband talks about drinking all the time. That's what he calls. I
Yeah.
didn't realize it was.
Mm-hmm. If you've heard somebody say, "Oh yeah, I love the taste of buttermilk," they are probably not talking about what you find on the grocery store shelf. It is probably the leftover product of making butter.
Okay, that probably is why.
That one does taste much better than the cultured buttermilk at the grocery store.
That makes a lot of sense because I've always said I don't know how anybody can like buttermilk because I have tasted it and it's not very good in my opinion. Now, if you like it, it's great, but I'm just not a big fan. So, thank you.
Two different things.
Yeah. But
if your recipe calls for the buttermilk that's the leftover of the making butter process, and you put in milk with some kind of souring liquid, you're not going to be terribly happy with your outcome.
Is that right? Okay, good to know. Good to know. All right. Well, the 7th, July 7th, our first in-person class at the Northside Library. I'm excited. I get to come back out and be with people, not talking to the computer. Yay.
And we're going to be outside. We're going to be in the shelter house, assuming the weather cooperates.
Right.
We'll be inside if the weather's bad. So we do have a backup plan, and registration is open for that class now.
Okay. Yeah, I've been passing the word. So everybody, go on, get registered, come hang out with us. We'll have a good time. You'll get to actually taste some of this stuff that I keep telling you tastes so good. You might think I'm lying to you. I'm not. It's really good stuff. I promise.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, thank you, Jonna, and thanks everyone for watching.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.